My name is Rabbi Daniel Sher. I am here teaching Torah today for Rabbi Amy Bernstein. It is also her birthday, so wish her a happy birthday. If you're hearing this on the podcast, shoot her an email. Let her know that you are celebrating from all around. Happy birthday to Rabbi Bernstein. And now let's do a little bit of learning, a little bit of engaging and wrestling with text in honor of birthday, because quite frankly, that is always how we have celebrated as a people. We have always chose to use our text to celebrate. And in modern months, especially in what's happened in the KI community, we've learned to use our text to console, in our text to stabilize, in our text to contextualize, and all of these different ways that we use our text to be the foundation in which we experience different moments in our lives. And so today really struck me when I was looking at the words of Vayakhel. Now, some years we don't get the chance to look at this portion in such depth, because in many years, depending how the holidays fall out, we combine this week and next week's Torah portion into one. And quite frankly, I think Vayakhel often gets the short end of that stick because people want to know how the book of Shemot will end. But today, we get the chance to really look at our piece of Vayakhel. And for many who are observing the different ways that we see Shabbat, we actually use two different books of study. But I want to focus on Vayakhel today. Who can tell me a little bit about Vayakhel? And if you don't know, that's okay too. Don't worry. We have plenty of material to cover. But who thinks they know something that feels relevant and pertinent to this moment in time?
Clothing.
Building? Okay. That's
Clothing.
fair.
Clothing.
Okay.
And the importance of dressing for the occasion.
Ah, yes. Dress for success, right?
Yeah, it's the fashion portion.
Okay.
So echoing what Bert said, we're giving a lot of love to the artisans of our community. So people who make things beautiful, uplift them through what we wear on our body and experience in our sacred holy spaces. So
beautiful.
Creative people.
Another way to contextualize that, Margot, is the idea that the very utilitarian aspects, what we wear, how we dwell, the things we build, all of them have a direct correlation and connection into expression and beauty and celebration. And so you either have the choice to simply do in a utilitarian way or express in a deeper way. And our text celebrates and prioritizes the notion that the artist has a responsibility within all of those creations because they make a profound statement, right? If you think of artistry, at some point, craftsmanship, you go to a 200-year-old doorknob, it's going to be ornate with details. And if you buy a doorknob today at Home Depot, it's probably a little boring. And so there's even a question to be asked, have we lost some of the guidance that it's asking for, that when we build, even in a utilitarian kind of way, that we do so with an expression of art and appreciation for the world around us in a way to add beauty? Yes, Bert.
Also, the importance of the details.
And
okay. Following a plan and being careful about what one does as opposed to just going, well, whatever.
It sounds like you might even be promoting us all the way into Passover and the idea of a Seder to remember each part of our origin story. But now you're getting me off topic. And as a rabbi, I do that a lot. So that is a fair way to see this. Our tradition has a way of reminding us of the importance of the details. And whether that be in this week's portion or in the celebration of the artist, because what an artist tends to do is sweat the details. And I'm not meaning that in a bad way. I mean that in a very celebratory way, whether it be a musician worried about every bit of the composition of their work, to a painter worried about the exact right coloration of each ink, to a builder, to a sculptor, to you name it, an artist sweats the details. And our tradition doesn't just worry about the biggest global impact. It worries about the most minutia type details as well. But on top of all of that, this portion is also where we are reminded to give, and then inside of giving, we actually are told to slow down. This is the very portion in which the Israelites bring so much material for the construction of the tabernacle that Moses has to tell them to stop. B'Tzalel and Oholiab, they're gifted craftsmen. They construct the elements of the tabernacle. But before we can even get to that, Moses has to tell the people to stop giving.
Rabbi,
this struck me. Yeah.
Excuse me, if I might interject, my husband, Richard Ubik, used to call this attention to every minute detail mouse milking. He said artists are mouse milkers. And I thought that was so perfect.
Because there's some very real detail inside of that. Yeah. And what does it mean? What does it mean to have something, to obsess over something that other people may not even notice? That other people may not even notice. And so that gets us into a bunch of the different topics of today. But I want to, again, reorient us a little bit to this odd moment in which Moses says, okay, too many pieces, too much stuff. There's now too much. It says here on line 20, let's see if I can pull this up for you. It says that all of the things that they were gifted, here we go. Let's open right here. We're going to look right at the beginning of chapter 36. Betzalel and Oholiab and all the skilled persons of who Adonai had endowed with the skill and ability to perform expertly all the tasks connected with the service of the sanctuary, carry out all that God has commanded, all that Adonai has commanded. It's a perfect setup. First of all, it gives us a lot of context to what it means to be an artist, to be inspired by God, to feel something godly while you do this work. And it's important that we don't reduce that idea. But now we keep going. He calls them, he talks to them, and this is where it gets really important. The people are bringing more than is needed for the tasks entailed in the work that Adonai has commanded to be done. So line 6, Moses thereupon had this proclamation through the camp. Let no man or woman make further effort towards gifts for the sanctuary. So the people stopped bringing. Now, as someone who cares about the development of a nonprofit and the support of an institution, we don't often elevate this line. This is not a line that we often talk about. So much had been brought forth that Moses tells them to stop. And I'll be perfectly honest, if I had been asked to teach this material 10 weeks ago, I probably would have glanced over this line. But in the last 10 weeks, I have learned what too much kindness might look like. Now, I don't want to get anyone mistaken here. It's not the idea of kindness itself. There is an abundance of kindness, and I want us to overflow with kindness. I also currently have 15 pairs of jeans. I had 3 pairs of jeans before the fire. Now, I am internally grateful for all the people who made gift and donation and kindness. And at some point, I too had to ask, please stop bringing stuff over. There's too much to go through. My children have a total wardrobe, no shorts because it happened in the winter time, but we'll get there, right? But there was this point where donation centers, distribution centers stopped taking donations. Now, what an odd conundrum to be in. What an odd conundrum to be in a space where we may say, please, this is such a generous act and I can't accept more of it. So the first question I have for you is, what are we supposed to do with that? What are we supposed to do with a piece of material that encourages us to have a limitation when it comes to the generosity of material items? Now, by the way, Torah was written before credit cards, so I'm not quite sure they ever would have said this about monetary contributions for the long-term well-being of an institution. But the text specifically was talking about overloading with donation. So what are we supposed to do with that?
I can tell you what we do. We either tell people, thank you very much, we don't need it, give it to someone else who really does, or we thank them, accept the donation, and then if we later find out we don't need it, we re-gift it or donate it somewhere else.
Brilliant. And I don't think you're alone in that. I think that's a very, very common practice.
It's hard when someone reaches out to you. Now we're talking about an individual to individual, which is different from giving to the sanctuary. We're talking about relationship between individuals. When someone of their heart reaches out to give you something, you want to accept their gift and not just give them more trouble. So, so sometimes we just accept it, say thank you, and redonate it if we don't want it. Or if they haven't given it to us yet, say, let me see, send me a picture. Let me see if I need it. And then, by the way, if I mention, speaking of donations, this Sunday at Leo Beck, for people who lost their homes in fires, there's a fair where people have donated Judaica.
Yeah.
given away. It's at Leo Beck starting at noon.
Yes, Sunday and Tuesday. And then for those who can't make it those days, we will be helping to coordinate further opportunities to find some of those items. And again, those items are gifts of love. Even if you don't know the person, they chose very specific things they wanted to give that had meaning and heirloom and connection and pride. Many artists made new items to donate. It was exactly as we're talking about. Yes, Rachel.
Thank you. I was actually going to say something along the same lines as what Bert said, but I was going to say pay it forward. So thinking about this idea of community and sort of like, like rings on a tree, so if your community is already been cared for, then what community outside of yours is in greater need? Because one of the things that was so remarkable to me, so I don't live in the Palisades. I've been listening to your podcasts for years now and then finally joined so that now I can listen to you live because you guys are great. So thank you. But one of the things that was so remarkable was that, in the middle of all of this, Rabbi Amy and the rest of you were working, on food relief, so the kindness itself, I mean, moving away from the material objects themselves, the abundance of kindness and giving was that it was there to give to others. So you may have had enough in the way of what had been given to you, but there was so much more that still had to be given to other people who had food scarcity. And so in the middle of everything you're going through, there she was, putting together packages of emergency food rations, for a community, another community outside of your immediate community. So does that make sense?
Yeah. One of the things that my family prioritized was we went and helped set up. I took the kids and we helped set up one of the donation centers that days later we were walking through for donations. And it was a really important piece for my children to realize that they still had the opportunity to add something. Now, could they have done the whole thing? Absolutely not. Learning our bandwidth and learning our limitations was a very important piece of this experience too, not in this Torah, but in general. But the idea that we knew there would be an overabundance. So A, we wanted to help with the setup, but B, as we got items, we also found spaces to donate them to. Or we called our friends who had also lost and we asked which things they needed. When we were given two of a jacket of something, one went to a friend, and now our kids like that they're matching. Like there's so many different ways for us to spread this love that one of the pieces that I think is so interesting is the text doesn't get into why Moses didn't just allow more of the goods and then organize and store them for future moments. Instead, the text literally says, we can't, like no more, bring no more. And so part of the question becomes, why did Moses do that? Now, by the way, that's our job as readers of the text, to speculate and think about what it is that drew Moses to this notion. I, for one, in this new perspective over these last 3 months, could see that there was a concern over people giving so diligently that they then didn't have the resources that they might need as they start to strengthen their space, build home, figure out their own mental well-being when it comes to stuff, right? There's this phrase to give the shirt off our own back. And I have mixed feelings about that phrase. I'll give you the jacket off my back, but if I now am shirtless, I may not be able to get into the room. I mean, it says no shirt, no service, all right? I need at least a shirt to be able to continue to interact with my society, to do the very work, to give the very ways, to love the very people. And so part of this may also be, what is the limitation of giving to make sure that you have still given to yourself enough to sustain? In your example, once figuring out the food insecurity came after a meal, came after making sure that we took care of ourselves. And that's an important aspect of what it means to heal the world and to do this work. Betsy, you had unmuted for a moment. I just want to make sure that you didn't have something you wanted to add.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to say that one thing I've learned through this whole experience is to appreciate the giver, not only for their generosity, but certain givers like, I like the way they approach things where like I'll have friends that will instead, because say we're in the same situation as you where we've gotten too much stuff and I've been passing it on to other friends that don't have as much. But some of the people that give or even just reach out to see how we're doing, what I appreciate is they'll text or email and they'll say, I just want to let you know that I'm thinking about you. I love you. Do not respond to this. I know you have too much on your plate. I don't expect a response. Or they'll say, I have these things, these items that you might need. Here's pictures. Please don't feel like you have to take them, but just let me know, do you want them? Because they don't want to overburden us with stuff. And so I like that perspective, of the givers and the way that they approach things. Not everybody does that, but some people do.
Yeah, certainly. I agree. Margot.
So I am just very inspired by this whole conversation, and I think there's a layer in between the giver and the receiver as well that has to do with how is this either curated or collaged in a way that makes it more beautiful and more useful and kind of synthesizes the many things that go into the actual giving. An example of which is, so there were some teen girls in Pasadena after the fires who were like, we're teens and we don't want to like crawl through piles of clothes. We want to go shopping. So like people in the Hollywood wardrobe community came out and created like a cute store. They brought racks and they brought like great merchandising. There was that like middle layer of people who had the inspiration to create a beautiful experience or to curate that in a positive way that made people feel invited and like they had agency. So I think that's just one example relating to the fires, but I think, that's an art form too. You see, mixed media artists who will build like a beautiful metal and glass sculpture, and you're bringing many things to create a form of beauty that can be appreciated by a broader audience. And I think today's, this week's Parsha, like really that's what makes me, it's like, how do we collage, all of these offerings together, to make something.
No, it's channeling a very real piece of Betzalel in the utility purpose of giving. That was what I was actually really impressed with on a lot of these centers. It felt like shopping. It felt like gathering. And something that I spent a lot of time trying to explain is that there are these buckets that many of us were carrying around. These buckets of emotion and trauma and all the different pieces that we needed to deal with. And there was a choice to either add to the bucket and the weight or remove some of those stones from them. And certain actions, even with the motivation of kindness behind them, accidentally added weight. So the difference is that teenagers have a lot of chutzpah. So it's good because they can tell you directly what they feel. But a lot of adults sat with, I don't want to go through a pile of donated. Now, some will say it's because they've given for so many years to donations. I'll say I've also changed my understanding of donation. In the future, I think those storefronts, they've been around before. People have done them before, but it was so much more powerful now is if you want to help people find their new wardrobe, you have to do it in a way that doesn't add weight to their butt. That doesn't add the emotional weight of this piece. So instead, they got to go shopping. They got to feel some autonomy over picking the item. We added the artistic detail into the way in which we gave. I think we often worry about efficiency to such a deep degree that we forget the quality addition of the artist detail. And that is in all aspects of life. And we're just seeing it in the aspect of donation and kindness and caretaking. And yet we've always remembered, and Rachel, I'll call on you in one moment, when we take the teens and teach them to feed the home insecure folks, one of the first things I tell all of the teens is, if you make eye contact and you tell people to have a good day as you slop spaghetti on their plate, the spaghetti will taste twice. Because there is a difference in the way in which we are approached, and that dignity and that humanity and that kindness will literally change the way we experience the very same kind. Yeah, Rachel.
Thank you. What Margot said, and then Rabbi, what you followed with, reminds me of that part. I can never remember what part it is, but it's about the leavings on the edge of your field and how it's so critical. And I think, didn't the rabbis then end up reconstructing all of this where you spend all this time on what do you do when people are no longer an agricultural community? How do you replicate this? Because how do you maintain the dignity for, the widow or the orphan or the stranger who's coming around and, able to, herself or himself, pick this, take the stuff away because it's so critically important that you not be gathering this up. You're leaving it. Do you know what I'm talking? I mean, I know.
Not
I
only
always am
that,
saying, do I make
if
sense?
you're talking about paya,
don't make sense.
You're talking about paya in the corners and gathering. But I'll do one step further. It's harder. It was designed. I think people intend to read that as giving shouldn't be hard. Just leave the corner of your crop. But that's actually harder. When you're efficiently in the space of harvesting, leaving a section actually messes with your efficiency to an extent. You have to think about where is it that you leave it? How do you still regulate it? You can't let someone come and wreck all of the trees. So while you're giving people the dignity to gather, you've actually taken on a burden of hands-off management of your own property. It's harder. It's not actually easier, but it is such an investment of dignity and such an investment in humanity that it's worth doing.
And how do you keep animals away from it? So if an animal, animals are going to come, right? So, I mean, actually,
by the way, this is a great question,
farming,
right?
As someone who lives in a farming community, I can tell you.
You need netting and gates and all kinds of things to remove the animals, which means you then have to have someone who can open the gate during certain hours to allow the people to do this work. It is a burden, but many of the burdens that we take on for the soul of humanity are worth doing. We just don't normally think about them on the side of regulating our gifts. And again, I want to apologize. I said an abundance of kindness. I'm talking about the material kindness. I have one friend, for instance. She is amazing. We have been friends for so long that I've told her I no longer have a choice to be her friend. She is a sibling, and we are stuck together even if we had nothing in common for the rest of our lives. And when she came over, I loaded her car with the things that I wanted her to find another place to give. I said, what you can do for my family is you can find a place for it. Yeah, Bert or Carol. I can't tell which one of you raised your hand. So I'm
it's me. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was Maimonides, the great rationalist, who put together a list of levels of tzedakah.
That's correct. Maimonides' ladder.
Right. And there's a ladder. And in the middle of it is the giver knows who he or she is giving to, and the recipient doesn't know. And anyhow, the highest level is donating where you don't know who's getting it and they don't know who gave it. I believe that's the highest level of tzedakah.
Well, so there's actually an argument.
It has to do with the dignity of.
There is. Yes, you're absolutely right. So the ladder, which is a fascinating piece to look at, and boy, do I love Torah study, because one of the things I often share is that where I think a conversation will go just takes beautiful inroads in other places. Maimonides' ladder is a great example. The bottom of the ladder, while still on the ladder, it's important to recognize all these are versions of tzedakah. And the bottom of the ladder is when a gift is given begrudgingly, when one feels forced to give. Maimonides says, still good because you gave, but let's work on the integrity. So then right above it is when gifts are given willingly. Right above that is when recipients have to ask for help. If someone has to ask for the help, it's good that you've given it, but it's still not quite there. So now we're at the 6th rung of the 8. 5 is when both know and the gift precedes the request, where the person did not have to ask, but everyone knows what's going on. 4 is when the recipient knows the donor. It's one thing to be given from a stranger. It's another to be given from 3, when donor knows the recipient. That's a little bit different here, right? The directionality. And here's the kicker. Many people think the top of the ladder is anonymous giving, and it's actually the 2nd rung. It's pretty high up there, because what you do is you give someone access to need without asking them to feel like it's affected really. But the number one act of tzedakah, according to Maimonides, is creating business partners. It's creating, helping a person to become self-sufficient through business and opportunity. So the number one way is to give them the tools, and not just the tools. Don't just teach them how. Help to set up the scenario in which they have the opportunity to thrive. Now, that's a little more complicated, which is why we generally end with anonymous giving. But the reality is, this is part of what I think Moses is actually. If you give too much, will you have what you need to sustain for the future giving that we ask for? Have you made sure that everyone has this opportunity? Yeah, Mark.
I'm not sure that this is really apropos of Moses asking the people to stop giving, but the thing that comes to my mind has to do with the notion that we must remember that we were slaves, and that it's inherent in much of what everybody was saying, what you were saying, I think. But I just wanted to make it explicit that the giving is not only about the need of the other person, but about who we are as well. And those two are so intimately connected that I think the question, in a sense, the question of giving too much fades into irrelevancy, because it's not empathic to give somebody more than they can use. It's not a recognition of the other person's need and of one's own sense of oneself as an empathic person.
I think what I find so brilliant, again, what I always find so brilliant about our text is the depth of relevance that a document 3,000 years old seems to hold, when what you're talking about now is something that has taken modern society many iterations to even fathom the idea of whether or not what feels like blunt kindness and blunt generosity is actually achieving the goals that they're setting out to do. And our text, I do think it's hinting at something similar when we see it that way. Any other thoughts on that piece before we shift a little bit? Okay, shift away. There is one more piece of this that I find so fascinating. There's one more piece inside of this conversation of generosity and giving and effort and focus that is so fascinating. And it's something that we already know from other pieces of our text as well. And that is, God commands the Israelites not to do any work in the sanctuary on Shabbat. Now, this is an ongoing joke in rabbinical, just so that we're all. The idea that we are commanded not to do work on Shabbat, let me tell you, my wife would disagree that I don't work on Shabbat. But let's be very real here. The conversation of work on Shabbat are different pieces. What is the text referring to in this week's portion when it says God commands the Israelites not to do work in the sanctuary on Shabbat? What specific work are we talking about? Yeah, Margot.
We're talking about manual labor work. We're talking about lifting the muscle energy. But quick little extra Margot piece. Spiritual work is a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, 365/6 day a year job. So interesting to recategorize, what is work, because let's give due credit to our spiritual workers who work beyond, and where is their Shabbat too. So
okay. Now, by the way, I want to note this is actually not a complaint, because if it is work for me to talk about prayer and eat cookies with all of you on Friday nights, then sign me up for work, right? Like this is a good, but there's something different here. In this week's piece, it's not just that. It's, yes, of course, the manual labor, but there's something deeper too. Yeah. Bert/Carol.
Yeah. Isn't it the 39 different kinds of work necessary to build the Mishkan?
Okay.
The rabbis derive the 39 things you're not supposed to do on Shabbos, from which the Mishnah adds like hundreds and thousands of additional things.
Yes, so we do have the 39 prohibitions.
It starts with the types of work to build the Mishkan. So I guess it's even the building of the Mishkan shouldn't be done. We should rest even with the building of the Mishkan on Shabbat.
And that's the piece that I really want to focus. We know Shabbat is inherently important. In fact, Mishnah will go on to argue who exactly deserves Shabbat in your home. And guess what? The answer is everyone, including the cows. The animals that don't discern the weak are told that they get Shabbat, right? My dogs think every day is the same day. And quite frankly, if I leave the house for 7 minutes or 3 hours, they act the same way when I come back in, as if I haven't been home in a week. Their concept of time and relevance is different. And yet we're told in Mishnah that everything in the house deserves Shabbat, mainly so that A, we aren't giving a hierarchy and priority to some over others, but B, can you as manager of the home fully embrace Shabbat if there are parts of your home that are Shabbat irrelevant? Can you fully disconnect from something if you stay connected? Sometimes this is not about the animal themselves. It's about our opportunity to fully embrace Shabbat. So here, go back to the brilliance of the artist. Go back to that line that I read earlier, that Moses acknowledges that the artist is imbued with the Spirit of God to do their task. How do you shut off that spirit? How do you ask someone who feels the joy and energy of the divine to not use that spirit in the middle of a project? The warning wasn't the regular Shabbat warning. In Vayakhel, we're being warned that even when our hearts are motivated to continue something through the work, where do we say, I'm not tired, I can keep going? Think back to college, how many of us did all-nighters because our brain was still going when really it was not. It was a bad idea. Anyone who pulled all-nighters, and I'm included in that, did not work, right? But we were so inspired by something, we were so motivated by something that we didn't take a break. Think of how many newborn parents keep saying they're all right, well past the torture level of sleep deprivation. But there's this thing that motivates them. So what would our tradition say to do? Call your neighbor, call your grandparent, call your friend, have them come hold the baby for 2 and take a nap. And so here it says, even when you're motivated by the literal Spirit of God, you still have to take. Now that is easier, but critically important when it comes to maintaining and scaffolding, building out society, when it comes to appreciating, enjoying, and connecting to the world around us. That is something that has to be done. Yeah, Margot, your hand was up.
I was just my hardest, and I'm not following this one as religiously as the other commandments, or trying to reconstruct it. But for me, as just a divinely inspired person, like Shabbat is the best time for me to have that energy, and I find myself filled with the Spirit, that is my hallelujah day is truly Shabbat, because it's the time when I put the boundaries, around other secular work, and I can get close to what is truly within my spirit, whether it be Torah study, or whether it be beautifying my home, or whether it be, just like the things that I've tried to be with God sort of when it comes to, what is work, like imagination and dreaming, type of activities, I'm going to do it anyway because I'm not the best Jewish person, most observant Jewish person, but I do think that Shabbat is also the counter argument is it's special that we get to block everything else out, that we get to have that divine relationship with our spiritual essence and get to be filled with that, the divineness, that we dwell with that, with the Shekhinah, and she's talking to us and we're enjoying the inspiration that she gives on that day. So probably not exactly what you're saying, Rabbi Sher, so my apologies, but something that I just brought me closer to.
Look, the 39 prohibitions that we're speaking about earlier from Bert, those are guidelines. I believe that halakha is divinely inspired. I believe that there's a path that we walk on. I also always remember that a hate is a misstep and I can get back on the path. And so for me, so much of Shabbat becomes finding a way to make sure that I've created and cultivated that balance. I mean, Rachel, you wrote in the chat, tearing the toilet paper. This has been the hurdle in my family for a long time. I want to tear the toilet paper. Now, don't get me wrong. I will gladly tear toilet paper in a utilitarian purpose needed, even during the hours of Shabbat. And if that's too much information for you as rabbi, I do apologize, did not see it going that way. But if my kids can help pre-tear toilet paper for what might seem crazy or ridiculous, but gives them the opportunity to start to tell their brain rest is coming, then it's all worth it. These ideas are often just suggestion for how we can find ourselves in spaces that help us enhance our Shabbat and our rest. I have told many people, if you love video games and you're too busy during the week, then I give you permission to play video games. But if you get mad during video games and throw the remote, don't play on Shabbat. Because what you want on Shabbat is a chance to not add stress and burden. So you have a really important task. Find the things that bring you joy. What I learned in Israel is I went on hikes on Shabbat. That's not rest. I was hot. I was sweaty and tired, but it was rejuvenating. And it was something I didn't have time to do during the week. And mind you, I was doing this with my extremely observant family. So it wasn't like I was just finding my liberal rabbi loophole. Walking on Shabbat is perfectly acceptable, but it can still be exhausting. It's if it gives you a gift that you can't get during the rest of it. And so when we go back to Vayakhel, it's not even about that. It's about making sure that your enthusiasm and your energy and your passion doesn't accidentally stop you from the necessary rest that you still need to reinvigorate that passion. Yeah, Rachel.
Thank you. So 2 things. One, what you just talked about the hiking, it's that reminds me of when Rabbi Amy in the past has talked about re-selfifying because of the Hebrew word there, right? I don't, forgive me because my Hebrew is appalling, but so that word that has nefesh in it, that is actually about what Shabbat is supposed to be about what she always translates as re-selfifying, right? Yeah, thank you. But so that made me think of that. But I wanted to, maybe you could talk more, if it's not too off track, about this connection between how building the Mishkan is a creative act that the artisans are engaged in. And God was creating the world, but had to rest for a day. So the creative, capital C, has to rest. So that there's something that in order to be the creative, in order to be the artisan, in order to be the one who creates, that rest is required, is a necessary part of that is an essential part of being the creator. And I don't know if what I'm saying, again, I never know if what I'm saying makes sense. It feels like there's something there, this connection between God needing to rest and the artisan needing to rest.
Well, let me ask you, how many days does it take to create the world?
6.
Are you sure?
And rest on the 7th? No? Or am I, okay.
How many days of creation are there? No, you're not wrong. It's obviously a question that I've asked because other people have answered the same way. The story is the 7 days of creation. So the answer to your question is right there. The 7th day, the rest day, is required.
Is part of creation.
Exactly.
Is required.
Because creation is ongoing. Creation doesn't end on Shabbat. Our tradition, the rabbis speak in brilliant ways throughout all rabbinic literature that creation is an ongoing example. When we circle the groom or the bride circle 7 times, it's to exemplify that building a world around each other takes the same intention and focus and love as the days of creation. But it's the days of creation, not the days of creation and the rest. Rest is part of creation. If you don't find rest and rejuvenation, if you don't re-selfify, as Rabbi Amy says, and find yourself amidst all that you're giving out, then you will lose the very ability that you have to continue creation. It's not separate from, it is deeply interconnected with the process of creation. And this Torah portion might be one of the greatest clues for that, because we have to tell the artist to pause from a passion. You generally don't need to remind people to pause from passion because passion doesn't drain them. Why? Because most of us don't get to follow our passion all day, every day. I love being a rabbi. I hate emails. I love all of you who email me. I can't stand emails. And so there are even things inside of this job of passion that I'm not passionate about. But when you are deeply focused, entranced with your passion, someone has to remind you to rest. My first year in a student pulpit, I was in Victorville, California, wonderful Jewish community that shows up. And I was leading Yom Kippur. And around 5 p.m., I was getting a little bit woozy because I had talked all day long. It's a student pulpit. They don't have a deep group of people that are leading services. I was on all day long. And these small Jewish communities, they don't want to take a 2.5-hour break like we do at KI. They want to go all day long. I taught in between services. Around 5 p.m., I was getting woozy and I hadn't had any water and I hadn't eaten. Now, notably, I was 26 and pretty confident that I could do that for the day until I turned and I saw my wife standing on the side of the bima behind a door holding a granola bar. And she said, "You're not making it to sundown. Don't stop and take a pause if you don't eat something or drink something." Now, since that year, I've learned a lot about what my body needs. And some years I might need a sip of water, and some years I may not. And years where there was health implications, I might have had to have a bite, and there was years that I haven't. But I stopped at first, and I had to recognize that even though I was driven by passion, I was so excited. I'm a second-year rabbinical student getting the chance to help people connect to the holiest day of the year. I needed a moment. I couldn't just follow the passion every second. I had to take a break. And that one's a really interesting anecdote because it directly interferes with other things we're being told we have to do. And yet, what good was I as rabbi if I passed out on the bima? And so there's a lot of questions at play. And even when there are passions, and even when it's our love, we still have to remember that rest, recuperation, reselfifying, Shabbat, however you want to note it, is an important part of the creative, inspiring process. And we shouldn't see it as a step away from what we're doing, but rather as a necessary component of this ongoing creativity and creation. Yeah, Betsy.
Isn't there, I see somewhat of a conflict between what you were saying earlier about how we should do things that bring us joy on Shabbat. So you gave the example of like somebody wants to play video games and they don't have time to do it during the week. So they just do that on Shabbat and it brings them joy. So it seems like there's a little bit of a conflict between that and taking a break from your passion, or just, like if you're thoroughly
if you're a professional video game player,
yeah,
you should not play on Shabbat.
Okay.
I have told an artist who says, but I love to draw. I said, yeah, you love to draw Sunday through Friday too. So you need to take a day where you don't draw.
So, okay. So maybe I'm thinking of like in my own situation, I'm a writer, but the only day I have to write, because during the week, especially now post fire, there's too many other things to take care of. So the only time I'm able to write is on Shabbat. So is that
the only day?
That's the only day I've found any time at all to do it.
And do you feel rejuvenated when you finish putting the thoughts on paper?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
It's complicated. Look, this is why I believe that it's an ongoing adventure. Many people may listen to this. Many rabbis may say, that rabbi's insane. Don't write on Shabbat. But what I would say is, if you feel that this is the only time you get, and if it can truly feel like it's reselfifying, as Rachel pointed out that Rabbi Amy uses the word for Vayina, if it helps you rediscover you, then it's critically important and should be done.
Thank you.
I want us to say the blessing of the study of Torah, what a privilege it is to study with all of you. I hope that this was a meaningful conversation. I hope for all of you listening on our podcast, this was a meaningful way to experience this week's Torah. I truly get so much out of collaborative learning. I want to remind us that the Torah has a co-author, and it's the reader. Each time that we read Torah, we contextualize what's going on in our lives, and we add so much fruitful thought and discussion and beauty to these same words. You are a co-creator just by thinking and experiencing and wrestling with these same words. And we are a better tradition. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'sok v'divrei Torah.